How you doing?
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too.
More pouring May weather at the moment, but it's going to bring flowers. It's good for the garden.
It's good.
Good for the environment.
Indeed. That's what we're here to talk about.
Which is what we're here to talk about.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of people curious about the new green initiative and the building initiatives that are happening coming out of Albany. If you look online, it can be tough to find something that isn't just a soundbite or a headline. The general soundbite is that every large building in New York that's glass and steel is going to be retrofitted to bring it into some kind of compliance by 2030, 2020, 2080. Well, It depends on which bit of compliance you're looking at. So tell us how that affects us and them and you and what's good and what's not so good, and give us some ideas of what's all happening.
Sure thing. So stepping back for a moment, 70% of the city's climate pollution, the stuff that causes global warming, is coming from buildings.
Really?
So so that's the top source of the city's pollution.
Okay.
New York City gives off about as much climate heating pollution as Egypt or Vietnam, to put it in perspective.
Oh,
so it's
as
a hell of a lot.
nation.
Yeah, exactly. It's
Okay.
it's a lot is the answer. It's from buildings, it's about 30 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent each year. It's as much as it sounds like. It's an enormous amount. Yeah. So about half of that, so about 30% of the city's pollution is coming from just 2% of real estate. 5% of buildings, those buildings over 25,000 square feet, which if you think of it is about half of a football field in size.
Okay.
So the city has just passed a law that requires those large buildings, basically everything from One World Trade Center down to like a 6-story building, to reduce their pollution below specific limits based on the year and the occupancy type of the building by 2024, and then by 2030, and then past that even more.
And that's going to be based on the amount of energy usage that they put in? Are they sort of doing a calculation that if you use this many kilowatts of energy, then you've got to pay this much in fines if you don't match it? How do they work it out?
Close. It's based on the amount of climate pollution, carbon pollution equivalent per square foot. So it effectively matches up with your energy use.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can imagine there's an awful lot of building owners in Manhattan that are less than thrilled about the new idea.
Yeah, well, this industry often markets itself as green, but the reality may be a little bit different of the building.
Yeah, for sure. In my experience, I've been in construction for 20 years in Manhattan, and I don't find New York to be particularly green in the way it builds, and primarily because it's the most expensive city in the world to build in, as it is. And you start adding in these costs of making things more energy efficient, etc., then it becomes even more exponentially expensive.
Right. Well, think about the apartment. That's the classic New York apartment. It's so hot in the winter that you have to crack the window open to cool it down.
Well, it's incubated.
Yeah, right. It's incubating a lot of waste.
Yeah.
So the law should really be thought of by building owners, I think, as an opportunity, maybe a kick in the pants, to become energy efficient, which, if you do it right, can save you money in the long run, sometimes even in the very short run.
Yeah.
So the classic example is switching out incandescent bulbs for LEDs. Immediately drops your bill. Everybody should do that automatically, immediately.
Yeah. I personally don't like the light that LED lights give out by comparison to an incandescent or a halogen bulb. I certainly appreciate my smaller electricity bill, but I'm not a fan of the light they put out and the way they actually create the light, and the fact that they turn on and off, physically turn on and off 200, 500, 800 times a second, depending on the quality of the bulb. I mean, this also has all kinds of other factors that play into it.
Sure.
So, but that's another story for another day.
Well, you can also set the bulbs. You're in luxury. You can set the bulbs for different kinds of light.
Yeah.
So if you can customize it so however you want. But generally, people don't notice the flickering. It's too fast for the human eye.
Yeah. What you see though is you get that effect when you get that strobe effect. But the costs of running even a modestly sized building, from the heating and the general inefficiency. I mean, we do renovations all over the city. We've been doing it for the last 20 years. And the number of buildings that we go into and we'll do a gut renovation on an old loft space that was renovated in the 80s or the 90s, and now it was sold for 200 grand back in 1995, and now it's worth 4.5 million. We rip it out.
Right.
There's no insulation in the walls.
Right.
How the lighting and what have you is being dealt with. The amount of waste is just extraordinary.
It's amazing.
But the concept of trying to address that on a city-wide scale is mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
And how do you get buy-in?
Yeah. Well, the answer is that over time you can build it into your capital plan as a building owner.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing to do here is to look at your metrics as a building, start to talk to some outside competent help, and then look
outside
at the
competent
levels.
help would be architects and designers that are specializing in this particular legislation, or other kinds of consulting.
I would look at energy efficiency in particular.
Okay.
So there are many firms that can help advise on the best ways and what are options to hit these kinds of levels of energy efficiency. But let me just step back for a moment. The 2024 levels that the city is going to require large buildings to hit cover about a quarter of buildings. That is, 3/4 of buildings right now are compliant.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So the heavier limit.
That sounds less dramatic.
It is a lot less dramatic.
Because the stuff, as I said, all I see when I read about it is sound bites, and it's either it's a typical place we are politically now, which is so polarized. If you want it, it's great. If you don't want it, it's terrible, and there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
So 75% of buildings are currently compliant.
Yes, with the 2024 limit on pollution per square foot. So
is that related to buildings that have been built after a certain date, and anything before that isn't compliant, or does that not really play into it?
It depends on the building. Certainly many older buildings are built particularly inefficiently. So that's true that many of them will be less compliant or more wasteful in general. But some of the city's worst polluters per square foot were just built. Some of those billionaire pencil towers are among the city's highest polluters per square foot.
Because it's all steel and glass and there's no insulation, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and they also did antiquated steam systems as their heating, which is kind of bonkers and was really, I think in retrospect, a big mistake for those building owners.
Why would they do that?
Presumably it's what they've done and they thought it was cheaper, but it's a dirty way to build at this point, inefficient. As you probably know, steam is not that efficient.
No.
So, yeah,
and it's not controllable, and you end up with the lower floors, as anybody who lives in Manhattan will tell you, if you live between floor 1 and 6, you get heat on for an hour and a half and cook, and if you live on floor 20 through 25, you're freezing because you get 15 minutes of heat.
Right. So there's a certain amount of work you can do to optimize steam systems. And so most buildings that are not compliant with the law currently probably can come into compliance by optimizing the steam system, doing relatively simple things to get to that 2024 limit. Now in 2030, it's a little bit more of a challenge.
Which is only 6 years off the 2024.
Yeah, it's 11 years from now. So it's also the date by which the United Nations world scientists tell us that worldwide climate pollution must drop by at least 40%, or the planet is going to be going into an irreparable catastrophe. So that date is no coincidence, and that's why the city is passing this law fundamentally. So by 2030, building owners, about 3/4 currently don't comply. That is, 3/4 are above the pollution per square foot. Yeah, exactly, for 2030, right. So that's where many building owners will have to do more work. So for a lot of building owners, again, they'll be able to comply by optimizing their systems, sensors, thermostatic radiator valves, simple improvements.
Turning lights off,
timers, all those kinds of things. Yeah.
I mean, the thing, Manhattan has this spectacular nighttime skyline.
Right.
But who is in all these offices at 2 a.m.?
Right, and it's already, by the way, illegal for them to have their lights on overnight like that when the building isn't being used. Yeah, there's already a city law on that.
Very pretty, though.
It is pretty, that's right.
Especially
I kind of think there should be a day where everyone's required to turn them on, but there you go. That's
especially coming over the 59th Street Bridge, and it's like the whole city lit up.
But as a college student, my favorite date spot was looking at the skyline. Cheesy, but there you go.
No, for real, it's absolutely beautiful.
So, but this won't have a negative impact on, I don't think, on the way that buildings look. Rather, what building owners have to do is think through how do we become more energy efficient. And outside advice can be really helpful here. So for the 3/4 of building owners who are above the 2030 limit, again, think of it as an opportunity to actually start to save yourself money, improve the building, both its comfort, so that you don't have those multi-story heating issues that leave tenants unhappy. And also
cooking half the time and cooking the other half of the time because it's neither heated nor cooled properly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Got cook or cook.
Sure. So
just add
should
moisture
be better
for the summer and the winter.
Yeah. So I think the 2024 and 2030 limits are pretty achievable under current technology, and they're things, frankly, that building owners should be doing already, but that they're not, and that's why the city has to pass a law. Yeah. So beyond that, I think it gets more challenging. The way that the law works is that it sets in process a way to set limits for 2040 and 2050, and unfortunately, pollution by 2050 has to come down by over 80% worldwide.
Yeah.
So that becomes even deeper cuts. So if you're a really far-sighted building owner, you're going to start to think on a multi-decade level, how do I improve my building over time to get to the point where my pollution footprint is really small? So let me talk to that for a moment. This bill fundamentally encourages electrification of buildings. So what that means is that the way your pollution comes down over time is you reduce the amount of energy used in the building.
That you bring in, yeah.
That's right. And where you're bringing it in becomes a lot cleaner over time. That's the electric grid.
Yeah.
So the electric grid right now is only at 5% wind and solar in downstate New York.
Okay.
But it's going to become much, much cleaner over time. So
what kind of time period are they looking at to have alternative fuel sources? I mean, it's crazy that you're thinking of alternative fuel sources, because these have been fuel sources they've been used a lot longer than anything else. But given it's an alternative fuel source, what kind of time period are they looking at to put the majority of the grid onto outside of fossil fuel?
So the state's requirement is for the grid to go 50% clean at least by 2030. So that's wind, solar, hydropower. Right now, the grid is at about, counting hydropower, almost all of which was built decades ago, the New York State grid is about 20% hydropower, wind, solar.
11 years. 2030 sounds such a long time away.
Yeah, but it's not that far away.
But 2020 sounded a long time away.
That's right.
Not so long ago.
Yeah, indeed. Well, we'll come up on it pretty quickly, but the state is relying on a bunch of changes that should, if all things go well, activists like us do our work, pressure the state to actually make this transformation happen. Offshore wind onshore, solar, plus that hydropower that's already built is going to get to 50% by 2030. That's what needs to be done, and that's part of what prevents the climate crisis. So that combination of a cleaner grid plus using less fossil fuels on site in your boiler, or even better, going completely off of that boiler.
Hence the note swapping to electric. So you want to get everybody off gas. And I mean, I'm guessing it's gas or electric, right? There's no other kind of fuel.
Right. So you can go oil, gas, electric is basically it. Some buildings are steam powered centrally in New York, but fundamentally, the trick here is to not go from oil to gas, and then in some distant future to go to renewables. It's to go right from oil to renewables and energy efficiency. So that's what this bill strongly encourages. So over time, what we want to see is building owners start to shrink their footprint by reducing energy use on site, by saving energy through all the things you can do, and electrify through the use of heat pumps, air source heat pumps, renewable energy. A little bit of solar on the roof can help, but that's a very incomplete solution. So those things together,
I guess the footprint of the building is so small and the volume is so great that really a solar solution is
marginal at this
marginal
point.
At best.
It helps. I mean, it can help, but under the current technology, if you covered New York City in its entirety with solar panels, it would only be 10-15% of the city's energy use.
And roofs are used for so many other applications in New York. You've got all your communications up there, you've got water towers, you've got roof decks. So it's valuable real estate that they don't want to give up for solar.
Nonetheless, worth thinking about is putting solar on the roof. So so that combination of things can get you to an actually green building, as opposed to something that is quite dirty in operations.
I imagine you're getting a lot of resistance from building owners, though, because this has to be billions of dollars.
It's an enormous amount of capital investment over time, yes. And so one of the things that is very attractive is that it creates an enormous number of jobs, particularly career track, good union jobs, and good design, construction, renovation jobs, skilled jobs to do this kind of work. So that's partly why we call it a Green New Deal for New York, because it creates good jobs to fight the climate crisis. Now, the nice thing about energy efficiency improvements overall is they tend to pay for themselves over time because the costs are lower than the financing costs.
Okay.
So what you can do is finance the improvements, pocket the money. That's the equation here that makes this viable, is that with a 10, maybe 15-year payback, you can make back the cost of the improvements that you made to comply with the law. So
based on what you save on your energy usage.
Exactly.
So if you're paying, $100,000 a month in energy.
Right. You cut it down to 50,000, that's great.
Then you're getting close to being able to pay for it.
Right.
I mean, obviously the math when we work these things out never seems to quite make it, but it's not just a dead weight of X billion dollars.
Exactly.
It's actually a fraction of that over a period of time.
Yeah.
So it's...
That's right. That's exactly right. So what we're hoping happens here, what we think will happen, is that a large new capital market will be mobilized to do improvements that by and large, I don't want to say in every single case, but by and large pay back in 10 to 15 years. And so it's a net gain for society, it's a net gain for building owners, it cleans the air, it creates jobs, it's a winner for everybody. So that's what we're hoping. Now in practice, there are going to be buildings that are going to find that to be very challenging.
Yeah.
So again, the most important thing here is to think on a multi-year, multi-decade way. If you're a long-haul building owner, think about it. I don't want to just hit the 2030 limits. I want to do what makes sense for my buildings and at a minimum hit those levels. And then think about, okay, this is going to get tighter and harder to achieve by 2040 and 2050. So if I'm a building owner, I'm thinking about large-scale improvements that over time can fit together and improve the building as a whole.
I guess the ones that are going to really suffer are the building owners who are in relatively short time horizons for their buildings of, say, 5 to 10 years rather than 10 to 50 years, because they end up with the costs, but they don't end up with the maturing of the debt.
There's a lot of building owners who may find this really challenging. And so there are some building owners where this may be economically ineffective.
Devastating.
Yeah, it's possible. There are some where it becomes actually next to impossible to do. So the law anticipates that. That's the good news. So there are ways to comply with the law that have you doing the maximum amount of pollution reduction. And then,
even though it doesn't comply necessarily with
there's an application process, right?
Okay.
So what you can do
it's like a
here,
grandfathering in, if you like, for the inefficiency.
on some level. So the law encourages building owners to purchase renewable energy credits.
Okay.
So what you can do here is you can think through, all right, this is the amount that I can get to cut energy use on site, and then I'm going to perhaps use renewable energy credits to make up the difference between the level that I have to hit under the law and what realistically I can do at the outer limits of effectiveness. So the city has an application process built into the law to a new office that is being created to handle this stuff. So this is going to be a big new effort by the city with a lot of complicated parts to it in that sort of variance process.
I mean, so many buildings, so many owners, so many individual scenarios. When you're talking about a big building that's being held by a company for 50 years, it makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense to amortize that over a long period. But if you're a small building owned by a cooperative type structure, I imagine this is going to cause tremendous pain.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think initially when people look at it, they will be like, exactly. They'll be shocked. However, when they start to think through what is actually required,
why am I paying 50 grand a month for heating and cooling? That most of it goes out the window because people literally open the windows all winter.
Yeah. So if you actually, like I said earlier, I think if you're a smart building owner, you're already doing a lot of this stuff. You're probably under these levels already. time to catch up if you're not under these levels.
Once you take the stupid out of the equation, which is having your heating on full tilt all winter.
Right.
Once you take that out, then you just need to manage it in a way that you can actually save sufficiently to start to pay floor by floor to have some of these renovations done.
That's right. That's right. That's exactly right. And over time, it is an opportunity. So again, I want to go back to the minority of buildings for whom this is a real challenge, right? A lot of buildings, they should be doing this already.
I mean, 25% of buildings is still a lot of buildings.
It is, right. But keep in mind, that's the dirtiest buildings per square foot.
Yeah.
Right? So many of them, this is New York City,
effect,
right? They're actually not doing things competently at this moment, right?
Yeah.
If they're above that level, chances are they should be pretty easily below that level.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Yeah, so I think the harder challenge is for the 3/4 that are already compliant with the 2024 level, but are not in compliance with 2030. Some of those building owners are just above the 2030 level, so but
they can manage them and get to it.
Exactly,
and they've got 11 years to do it.
Right, and you can the distribution of this, because we have public data, because the city requires public reporting of this data, is a bell curve.
Yeah.
So there's a cutoff in that bell curve. Some people are just above it. Some people are just below it. If you're just above it, it's probably pretty easy to manage your way down below it. But those people out on that tail there, some of them, it's really hard. So that's where the city's variance process will come into play for those buildings.
Try and help them out as much as they can, but also help buildings out that do have their heating on full tilt all the time. You know what? Some of this does feel, from someone who's in construction, been living in the city for 22 years, I look at some of these places and I'm like,
what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Yeah. Like, this makes no sense.
It makes no sense whatsoever because people are paying their maintenance and they're paying their rent, and it goes into a big pot and no one's kind of watching the pot. No one's really looking at the bills. Maybe it's time that you actually start getting this stuff audited and start bringing it under control.
That's right. And so how many times have you been in a building where you have to open the window in the winter to cool it down?
Yeah, mid-February.
Right, right. So those buildings are not compliant right now. They should become compliant.
Yeah.
So that's essentially what the law does.
It's a compelling story. It really is. And I came into this after reading a bunch of articles, thinking, well, I get the big building side of it, that this is outrageous. It's it's sort of fuzzy left-wing thinking to punish the real estate owners. But when you actually start thinking about it on a practical level, on an everyday living in New York feeling, you know what? We see it every day.
Right.
And when you're starting to see something every day, it probably has to be legislated into reality because people won't do it by themselves.
That's exactly the thing. The policy record on this issue has shown that incentives and encouragement to do this are unfortunately sometimes not enough. Because the truth is that...
The feather duster isn't doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And also just, you've been running the building for decades the same way. You don't really want to change. It's a little bit scary. It's a little bit risky. You don't want to do things. Exactly. It's a little bit of a pain. So you got to get going now.
So what point are we at? It's been approved. The De Blasio has said this is a reality.
Right.
The city has embraced it.
Right.
Is this happening now? This is it?
Yeah.
This is the end of that.
This week it's going to come into effect. So that first limit will come up faster than you think. It's in 2024.
5 years.
Sounds far away right now, but it's time to start thinking about it, and more importantly, also think about the 2030 limit. But really, again, I would stress, don't think of this because there's a new law, you have to do it. Think of it as, this is an opportunity for me to think about how to make my building energy efficient. And that shouldn't be seen in a partisan lens. That's just smart common sense. Make it energy efficient as much as you can, and you're going to comply with the law. Now, in 2040 and 2050, it gets more challenging, but you should set yourself up for the long haul to do the right thing.
Pete, that was a fascinating conversation.
Great.
Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Sure
I
thing.
really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was fun. Very fun.
Hopefully see you again.
Indeed.
Maybe in 2024.
I'm going to chug my coffee. Cheers, James.
Take care, man.